Hello Forkies, today I'm gonna show you my first round game from new competition that I'm currently playing. So I was having the white pieces, and of course I'm playing at the tournament called Mladinska Liga. This is a team competition, and this was my first round game. So I was having the white pieces, I was playing against Konopatsky Alexander. He is like 11 or 10 maybe years old child, but he is of course very strong. So of course I played the move 1e4, controlling the center, and I was kinda preparing for Alexander, and all I knew was that he will play pawn e5 and will get some mainline Spanish positions. And this is what happened indeed. And now he played the move pawn to a6. This is the mainline, simply attacking my bishop on b5, and now I have to make a decision. Either to take the knight on c6 or to play bishop a4, the main line. And of course I like to play bishop a4 in this position, and he followed the main move, the main line, with the move knight f6, of course attacking the e4 pawn, and now I have two choices. Either I simply castle, allowing of course this pawn to get taken, or I can play the move pawn to d3, of course securing the center. But I decided I will simply castle, and of course taking this pawn is not very good. Of course this is the variation that can occur, but bishop to e7 is better. This is known as the close to Ruy Lopez, and of course after rook e1, now I'm threatening to take the knight on c6 and then take the e5 pawn, because my e4 pawn is now defended. So b5 is actually the only good move in the position, and after bishop b3, of course my bishop was attacked. Now this bishop is on this very long diagonal and will pressure black position. And after the move d6, this is the main line. Pawn to c3 is the best, preparing to play d4, and in some positions after knight a5, trying to play bishop to c2, of course, saving my bishop. And after my opponent castled, this is the main line of the Ruy Lopez. Now the only good move in the position is to play the move pawn to h3, of course not allowing bishop to g4, pinning this f3 knight to the queen. And why? Because this is very important, because I will play the move pawn to d4, and this knight from f3 will be crucial defender of my center, of course. And now there are four good lines for black. Either you play knight a5, after bishop c2 the positions are good for black and white, of course. There is the move knight to b8, there is the move rook to e8, but my opponent decided to play bishop to b7, known as the Zaitsev system. And I was prepared in this variation as well. I played the move pawn to d4, and now rook to e8 is the best move, or you can play something like h6 followed by rook e8, bishop f8 is also very good. But my opponent followed the main line with the move rook e8, and now knight b to d2 is the only good move. Of course I'm trying to play knight f1 followed by knight to g3 in some positions, and of course I will play d5 if allowed. Of course this bishop will be then restricted. So my opponent decided to play bishop f8. This is still theory, I knew these positions very well, and now here is crucial point of the game. I can either play the move a3 or a4. a4 is of course the main line, just trying to attack these queenside pawns, but I like to surprise my opponents with the move pawn to a3 here, followed by bishop c2 and b4 in some positions. And my opponent played the move h6. This is the main move. There is also the move g6, followed by bishop d7 and h3 in the future, but h6 excuse me, is better than g6, of course. And after h6, bishop c2 is the best move, and this was the theory that I knew. Now g6 is the best move, followed by b4, knight b3, and my position is very good, of course. But now my opponent started to think on his own, and he made first inaccuracy or a mistake of the game. He simply played the move knight to h7. And of course this move isn't really logical, and of course f5 is never a threat in this position, because this bishop is no longer on this diagonal. Of course bishop b7 cannot longer defend the f5 square, therefore f5 is not really a threat, and I thought knight to h7 is just a waste of a tempo, which is actually true, and this move is not particularly good. And after a little bit of think, I decided to play knight to f1, followed by knight to e3 or knight to g3, creating some kingside attacks if allowed, of course. And now here my opponent was kinda shocked. I don't know, maybe he thought I will play b4 or something, but he played the move queen to f6, which is another not really good move. Of course, he is pressuring my d4 pawn, of course, but this move queen to f6 is not really good. Where will these knights go? Knight g5 is of course an idea, but I don't think this is too good, especially when you move your queen again. So queen to f6 is a little bit of a waste of time, of course. And now I decided to play knight to g3 for fulfilling my Ruy Lopez maneuver, of course, with this knight. And now he played the move knight to e7. And the whole game, out of the opening, in the middle game, he was simply retreating. Of course, I understand this move, knight to e7, of course, opening this bishop from b7, but he missed very crucial tactic in the position, which is to play knight to h5. This is very great, very good move. Of course, attacking the queen, it might seem very odd, because this knight is loose, it's undefended, of course, but of course, if my opponent were to play queen to e6, now I can play bishop to b3, putting some pressure on this king side for him. I will take this pawn eventually and will be up a pawn after queen d7. Of course, he cannot recapture the pawn because his queen is simply hanging. So after knight to h5, the only good move in the position is to play queen to g6. Or maybe queen to e6 was actually better by the computer, but I understand why he played queen to g6, of course. But after queen to g6, I have another very good move. Of course, he is attacking my knight, but I can simply play the move knight to h4, attacking the queen and defending the knight on h5 simultaneously. And after, of course, his only move is to play queen to e6, and after queen to e6, I have a way to win a pawn. And you can pause the video and try to find what the way is. But of course, the only good move in the position is to play bishop to b3, attacking his queen once again. And he cannot really retreat the queen to c8, and this is the only way not to lose a pawn. Of course, there is no pin on the d file anymore, and I cannot really win this pawn. But after queen to c8, I have this very, very good move, which is firstly to take, as I showed, and then to play queen to f3, and there is no way to defend the f7 pawn. And I calculated this from the move knight to e7. I calculated knight to h5, followed but knight h4, bishop b3, and queen f3 was my idea in the position. And after bishop b3, of course, he found the only way to survive this position, which is to simply sacrifice the pawn with the move pawn to d5. And first 18 moves of the game is behind us, and I played perfectly, and I have a position which is plus 1.2 for me. And now I started to thinking, do I take this pawn and then win this pawn on e5, of course, or are there any other choices? And I made my first mistake of the game, and I simply took the d5 pawn, which is of course a big mistake. I should have taken this pawn. Why? Because then if he don't take the pawn, then this pawn is simply pinned to the queen, therefore black has no other moves than to take the pawn probably. And then I have bishop to f4, intermezzo move, simply attacking the queen and developing my bishop from c1. And after something like queen to e6, now I can take the d5 pawn with tempo, of course. Rook is attacking the queen, this pawn is sufficiently defended. And after something like queen to d7, now I can play this d6, and after c take d6, now computer finds this really nice idea with the move queen to d3, just putting my queen on the center, maybe bishop c2 followed in near future, and some checkmate attacks on black's king. But of course I cannot find this in a regular game of chess. And after e takes d5, which was a mistake, of course, my opponent simply recaptured with the bishop, and now I simply traded everything off on d5, which wasn't really the best. Maybe taking the pawn firstly was slightly better. Oh, of course not. Yes, I calculated that rook to e5 simply loses on the spot in the game. I forgot, because after rook e5 there is bishop b3 intermezzo move attacking the queen, and after if I were to take the queen, then bishop d1 simply wins the game on the spot. This rook is hanging, maybe rook e1 is possible, but then simply bishop b3, and my opponent is of course winning. He has an extra piece, of course. So after e takes d5, bishop d5, bishop d5, and knight d5, I simply took my extra pawn on e5. Maybe taking with the pawn was slightly better, but of course taking with the rook is normal as well, of course putting some pressure on black's position. And after queen to d7, of course, very logical move, I didn't want to trade the rooks. Why? Because after rook to 8, rook to 8, my opponent gets the e-file, and as you can see from the evaluation bar, my opponent is almost equal. So, of course, I played the best move, knight to f3, defending the e5 rook once again, and if he were to take, then I would take back with the knight, and my knight would attack black's queen, followed by something like f4, maybe knight g3 and queen e2, and my position would be very good. But of course, after knight to f3, my opponent didn't took the rook on e5, but he played the move f6, which is a very logical move. And now I decided to take the rook, and after rook takes e8, I played the move knight to f4, trying to trade off knights, of course. And after knight g5, I thought that I had much better position. Why? Because I simply traded everything down, and I thought this endgame must be better for me, which is true, but it is not winning for me, of course. And after bishop e3, trying to play queen d2, rook e1, and trade off these two rooks, then my position would be much better. And of course, my opponent has the e-file, but I will conquer the e-file as soon as I will be able to do that. So after bishop d6, simply developing, maybe putting some pressure on this diagonal, of course, and maybe threatening rook to e1 if my pieces disappear from the back rank. Of course, this would be checkmate, because bishop is protecting the h2 square. And there were a lot of tactics in the position going on. I was thinking about b3, queen c2, and followed by c4 maybe, but then the a3 pawn is kinda loose, and I simply decided to play queen to c2, maybe preparing rook to e1, maybe preparing pawn to b3 followed by pawn to c4 idea, and maybe even a4 in some positions. And now my opponent surprised me. He played the move queen to e4, and I thought that this cannot be really good for my opponent. Why? Because after the trade occur, now I can play the move rook to e1. And I thought this position should be better. I will play bishop d2, and I will trade off these two rooks, and the bishop endgame should be much better for me. So, of course, rook to e1 wasn't really the best idea. I should have bring my king to d3 probably, but rook to e1 is simply okay. And after king to f7, I simply forgot that I cannot really play the move bishop d2, because after rook e1, bishop e1, there is the move bishop to f4, I believe, followed by bishop to c1. I don't know why this position is better for me by the engine b3, okay. What about bishop c1? a4 then. Okay, then maybe I have some, but this, I thought this bishop is really annoying on my queen side, of course. So after king to f7, I simply played g3, not allowing any bishop to f4, of course. The pawn is defending the f4 square. And after the move rook to e6, of course he didn't want to trade rooks. And after bishop d2, bishop d2 if would be played, then maybe rook g6 followed by g4. But I simply decided to play king to g2, kinda centralizing my king, maybe trying to play king f3, king e2, and then king to d3, and I thought that my position should be better. And now my opponent made a mistake. He played the move king to e7. And why is this a mistake? Because this rook is on the same file as the king, and now I can play bishop to d7, trading the rooks. And of course the engine would draw this position against me, but bishop endgames, same color bishops endgame, are very hard to draw if you are down a pawn. But of course the only thing that is saving my opponent is that I have 4 pawns on the dark squares, and his bishop is far more active than my bishop. but I think I would be able to win this endgame with the move bishop d2 followed by f4, and I think that would be sufficient to win my game. Of course, if the bishops disappear from the board, the king and pawn endgame is simply winning. So maybe after king to e7 I should have played the move bishop to d2, but I decided to play king to f3, which is the best move. I think bishop to d2 is far easier to play, of course. And after king to d7 I thought that he will just come to my queen side, and I simply played king to e2, and now this is very bad move. Why? Because after c5 my opponent is kind of forcing the bishop trade. You might ask how, of course, and I only thought about taking the c5 pawn, which is a big mistake, but of course if I were to play king to d2 or maybe king to d3 my position would still be better, but I simply took the c5 pawn, which is the best by computer, but I don't know why, because after bishop takes d5 he's simply forcing the bishop trade, the bishop trade, of course, and I simply play the move king to d2. Maybe rook to d1 was better, giving this check, followed by, I don't know, king to c6, and then maybe rook to d8 trying to get into the position. But I thought that this rook endgame has to be drawn, because after something like a5, rook g8 is of course not very good, because after rook to a7, I thought this rook endgame has to be drawn, or at least very hard to win. And of course after c5 I took the pawn, and after bishop takes c5 I simply played king to d2. And of course, why did I play king to d2? Because I wanted to take the bishop with my rook, of course. And after rook to d6, of course, I played king to c2, and after bishop e3 I took back with the rook, which is the best move. I'm threatening now to enter the king and pawn endgame with the move rook to d3, which would simply win the game on the spot. So my opponent played the move rook to f6, very good move. And now I probably should have played the move pawn to f3, but I played the move rook to e2. And this move is simply drawing the position. Of course, there is nothing I can do, because after king to c6 there is of course the move king to d2. I try to play king to e1 and of course defend my f2 weakness with my king. Then I would be able to move my rook from the second rank. But of course after king to d5 he is threatening to come to the b3 square, of course. And after the move b3 not allowing king to c4 idea, the position is simply a draw. Why? Because my opponent can play the move rook to f3, putting a lot of pressure on my third rank pawns, of course. And after king to c2 my opponent played a5 followed by a4 ideas, or even b4 ideas. And after rook to d2 check my opponent played the move king to c5, of course, centralizing the king. And I thought this position has to be a draw, but I tried to push for the win, of course. And now my opponent played the move b4. I played the move b4, excuse me. b4 check is the best move. And after a takes b5 I thought that I have to be slightly better. Of course I took back with the a pawn, and of course the idea is that he cannot play king to c4. Why? Because there is simply mate in 1. Rook to d4 is checkmate. But of course my opponent is 1700, he won't simply blunder mate in 1, of course. So he played the only move king to c6, and I simply, after king to b3 and rook to f6, I offered a draw. Maybe rook to f6 was an inaccuracy, maybe rook to a2 would be possibility, but after king to b6 I don't think there is much, because after rook to f3 simply putting a lot of pressure, there is simply nothing I can do. Maybe rook to d6 check, but then I simply have to go back, and the position is obviously a draw. And I drew my first round game from Mladinska Liga, and of course I'm not very happy with the result. I was having great position here, but I didn't know how to convert the position later on in the end game. And of course maybe there was a chance after king to e7 to play bishop to d2 and trading off the rooks. Maybe I would be able to win the bishop endgame, but okay, draw in the first round is very okay, not the best, but still okay. So this was my first round game from Kadetska Liga, And if you like the video, make sure to subscribe to follow more such content, and see you guys in another video.